Right. This is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 349. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 349 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. It's been a little bit. I'm back from vacation, and it's awesome to be back here with you. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about how to grow your controls business during a recession. So, 2 quarters negative GDP growth. We're in a recession. Stuff's trending downwards. Energy's going up. Supplies are hard to get. How do we go and continue to grow our controls business in this unique environment? Well, that is what we're going to unpack. As always, everything is available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/349. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/349. I'll be checking as we go through this episode, see what questions you have. Feel free to just go and ask any questions you got as we move through this. Okay, let's dive in. So first off, don't freak out, right? Just because there's bad economic news, we in the building automation industry are still in a pretty good spot. So as an industry, we are benefiting from the fact that we have, and it seems like my stream's a little choppy. Okay. Oh, no, it looks good. All right. We are benefiting from the fact that we have huge backlogs. Backlog being the amount of money left to execute from a project perspective. We have an increasingly, I don't want to use the word hostile, but an increasingly risky energy market, as well as a utility market that is very volatile. Prices are shifting up, prices are shifting down. There's craziness going around in the world geopolitically, and all of that impacts our ability to run our buildings, both from a operational perspective, from a supply perspective, from a utilities perspective. And then all along this, you have this huge push to electrify everything. Everything needs to be renewable. All of these changes are going on in the built environment. So the good news is that while the economy is contracting, we have a lot of things in our favor if we are willing to think about things a little differently, maybe take on some new behaviors. So I'll share with you some of the things we're doing in our business, and I'll share with you what I believe you can do in your business, having researched this topic quite a bit, having been in this industry for a long time, having been through a couple of recessions already in this industry. So, first off, what does this mean? Well, it means that people are going to be reacting emotionally. So depending on your customer base, if it is something where there is a huge dependence on public sentiment to drive that industry, be aware that, maybe that's not the industry for you to be in. So if you're something like real estate, where we see real estate markets contracting, where we see people still working from home, maybe you want to consider things like the institutional market. Maybe you want to consider things like K through 12, higher ed. Maybe you want to consider things like light industrial. All of these industries that are still growing and or have governmental funding that is going to keep them operating independent of people just deciding, and I was talking with our sales team about this the other day. I was like, we can't just depend on a single company, because we have several companies that spend a lot of money with us, very big companies. And then we have a lot of smaller to mid-sized companies. And I said, we have to expand that smaller to mid-sized market even more, because, all it takes is one finance person at a large organization to say, well, we're suspending training, in our case, training. But in your case, maybe we're suspending construction. Maybe we're reducing operational cost spend. And all it takes is that one person. And then if you're heavily invested into a single customer or a single vertical market, that can really impact your business. So how do you go about kind of growing in this scenario? Because I do believe that this is one of the best times to grow if you're strategic, because you're going to be able to buy talent at a lower price as people start to get laid off. You're going to buy businesses at a lower price. You're going to get lower costs on your goods, potentially, once the supply catches up. So you're really going to have a lot of things in your favor if you do things right. The first thing I want to talk about is more on the sales side, and then we'll talk on the operational side, and then we'll just talk about in general. So on the sales side, if you aren't prospecting, which a lot of organizations have gotten fat and happy off of their capital projects and their booked backlog. So if you are not aggressively prospecting for new customers, then you definitely should be. This is where you want to start to switch more to an owner focus, start to get into markets, like I said, that are going to have predefined budgets for their operations, and see how you can tie yourself to those. K through 12, higher ed, government, those are good markets to tie to in a recession. That being said, you also want to understand that cost pressures are going to be hitting your customers, right? So as cost pressures hit your customers, as you know, your costs start to become more of a big deal because the profits go down, costs basically stay the same, and that gives less working capital, so people start to cut things. So you got to start thinking from that perspective of, okay, if I'm in my customer's shoes, maybe, this is someone who runs I don't know, let's just think of some basic commercial real estate. And their tenants are starting to contract their businesses, so they're leasing less square footage. They're not doing space renewals, things like that. Their cost pressures are hitting them. So you need to be cognizant of that as well when you're discussing people. You want to think of, all right, how can I position my control system from an operational efficiency perspective, make you more effective, reduce your operational costs? How can I position the control system from an energy perspective? We'll talk about that a little later in the episode. So how can you position from those two perspectives? That will be something that if you refuse to go after the governmental market, the K through 12, the higher ed, the more stable market, and you insist on focusing on commercial real estate and private business and corporate campuses and things like that, then you need to shift your messaging. I mean, you should shift your messaging in general, but that's pretty much going to be the way that you sell to people moving forward in those markets. Sorry, my phone's blowing up here and it's distracting me. Realize that this is not just a recession. It's also an energy and supply shortage. So there's pros and cons to that, right? The benefit of this being an energy shortage, hearing about rolling blackouts in the Midwest is crazy. Seeing people switch to all these renewables, which may or may not be reliable all the time, that then leads to some conversation points about, okay, if you're dependent on a grid that is not potentially up and you're a life critical facility, how are you handling that? How many of your customers have UPSs on their control systems so that if they get a rolling blackout, all of a sudden stuff goes down? Maybe they don't have generator capacity. Maybe they have nothing to keep their controllers up and running. When they switch, even if they do have generator capacity, when they switch from normal to emergency power, maybe they have nothing to keep those controllers up and running. Some of these older controllers, they get reset. Maybe the controllers don't come back on. These are reliability issues that you need to think about. Okay. So you definitely want to think about how do you go and communicate around keeping a facility up and running, right? Because, I see right here, someone says, hey, in healthcare training's the first to go, right? Operational training, development of your team. Yeah, I get that. But if you can tie to stability of the power systems and their ability to impact life safety and patient reimbursements and, being in compliance, those are conversation points you can have. And yeah, okay, are you going to make huge bucks going and selling some load shedding strategies and UPSs to customers? Probably not, right? It's not the same as a new controls retrofit, but it gets you in the door with customers you may not have been talking to before. And it provides some capital infusion offset by our historic backlogs to carry you through. Because remember, the controls industry tends to lag the market by 12 to 18 months. So while we're probably not going to see anything, everyone's sitting here listening, probably thinking, yeah, Phil, we're so busy, we can't even care about this right now. But it's that same thinking that I saw in 2008, I saw in 2020, I saw in 2000, that, you don't think about it because you're fat, dumb, and happy. And then all of a sudden you get hit and you see the market collapsing around you and you're like, I'm still fat, dumb, and happy. Everything's good. And then 12 months later, boom, all the tenders are dried up. You're sitting there trying to execute work and there's no work to execute because you didn't shift to a more stable market that has predefined budgets. Okay. So that's something I want you all to consider as you continue to, work in this market is, yes, right now, maybe everything's great. What is that outlook for 12 months? You should be planning a 12-month outlook. I mean, just that's general good business, right? Is to think about that. We didn't talk about the supply shortage. So materials are going up, but they're going down at the same time. I live in northern Arizona. Every time I go down to Phoenix, I drive by 3 semiconductor plants that are getting built right now. So supply capacity is coming on. If you read some Harvard Business Review reports, you'll read about people bringing manufacturing back into the U.S., specifically around semiconductor and steel and things like that. And in the controls industry, the majority of our shortages come from semiconductor chips. I believe it was, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. So I will preface that, but I believe it was Automated Logic that moved from ArcNet to BACnet IP MSTP because they were having trouble getting ArcNet chips. I could be wrong. But, that's an example of supply shortage impacting things. So those are another opportunity for customers who are maybe with legacy buildings in critical environments. That may be a retrofit opportunity. Cash still is relatively cheap, even though we've had some increases in interest rates. It's still, if you look historically, I think it was back in the late 70s, it was like 20% for the funds rate, and we're only at 2%, if I remember correctly. So money's still cheap, and retrofits for stability purposes are a good conversation piece to have. I'm going to talk about something that's a little uncomfortable for a lot of people, and this is cutting unperforming accounts. Oftentimes, and I get this as a business owner, I never want to stop doing business. But, if I have a limited sales team, and you're going to have a limited sales team because as costs, pressure increases, as business contracts, you're going to start letting go unperformers or non-performers, which is going to limit your sales capacity. You also want to start limiting your business with or underperforming accounts. People who don't pay, right? Cash is king. People who take 180 days to pay, you probably want to reconsider doing business with them. Unfavorable terms in planned service agreements, things of that nature. Maybe you want to reconsider those. People who routinely just low bid you maybe want to reconsider looking at maybe a more owner-focused relationship where you get some higher margin and direct-to-customer purchases. These are things that I would encourage you to consider as you are looking at planning for the next 12 months. Something that's pretty obvious, and we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, becoming more consultative. So what does that look like? We're going to have an episode on consultative. We're going to have a couple episodes on a couple topics, consultative selling. We're going to have an episode on M&V and energy conservation measure strategies. But specifically to being more consultative, those of you who are truly just construction sales folks, you play your relationships, which I'm not diminishing the skill to be a construction salesperson. A lot of people tend to put construction salespeople or owner salespeople or solution salespeople in a bucket, and they look at one as more skilled than the other. Some folks will believe that solution salespeople are more skilled than the other two, and some folks will say owners. The market can be complex for any of those. That being said, for those of you who are solely construction focused, I want to encourage you to become more consultative, more business outcome and pain focused. The reason why is I'm a firm belief that within the next 12 months, we'll start to see tenders dry up. We will start to see new construction in certain areas start to dry up. I read we're at like 7% or 700% foreclosures on residential property increase last month. If I remember that correctly, I mean, that's a crazy number. You look at the average loan rates, you look at debt to income ratios. There's all these things that show that people personally are under a lot of financial pressure, which when consumer purchasing decreases, that decreases profit for businesses, which it all just kind of trickles uphill. And that means, right, new builds, new construction is potentially going to go down. So how do you counter that? Well, you counter that by becoming consultative. There's a good book by Rackman. It's called Major Account Selling Strategy. I'm a big fan of Spin. Although my director of sales, he prefers some other stuff. But I like Spin from a methodology perspective of situation, problem, implication, needs, payoff. I think it's a very simple way to think. And if you can go to customers, you can connect with your vertical markets, and you can start to understand their situation. How do they make money? Become a student of that vertical market or vertical markets. How do they make money? Who makes decisions? Basic sales 101. And then you start to become consultative. Okay, I see you run a hospital. You are having issues potentially with keeping your facility up and running due to parts or maybe due to energy, etc. How do we go and help you achieve that? And you become a consultative salesperson, and you do smaller scale consultative quick hit projects. All right, now let's shift gears off of the sales topic now onto the more operational topic. So the first thing, and we're going to do, I believe it's Friday's podcast is going to be on this topic, is standards and processes. If folks asked me, how did we become the fastest growing training organization in building automation, doing it online, which, I mean, I personally don't appreciate this as much as I probably should. But when I first started this business in 2017, I told folks I was going to train people online. They kind of laughed at me, right? They're like, okay, yeah, you're going to train building automation online. Like, good luck with that, because it has to be hands-on, has to be out in the field, has to be done this way. Then COVID hit, and I looked like a freaking genius just out of dumb luck because everything had to move online. All these companies are scrambling. They're like, oh, crap, we need an online curriculum. Oh, Smart Buildings Academy, you've got an online curriculum. That's great. But how did we get to that? How did we produce 40, now it's 40 plus courses, 10,000 plus students in 5 years? And it all comes down to standards and processes. So what I would highly encourage you to consider looking at is your business from a perspective of standards and processes. And there's a couple good books on this. There's The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. That's really, really dry and painful. I would say I probably completed 30% of the actual book, but I've completed the executive summaries of it. I just can't get through his writing style. It just hurts. There's some other ones. There's one sitting around here in my office somewhere on business processes that I recommend to any business owner when I talk to them. I'll put a link to that in the chat or in the podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/349. But getting really clear on your processes and your standards, it will make you efficient. It will, one, when you establish a standard, it's very easy to determine if something deviates from the standard. And once you're able to determine if something deviates from the standard, then you're able to go and say, okay, this is not meeting the standard. This is not where things should be. All right, how do we fix it? And how do you fix it? You fix it through processes. Okay, so standards are the expectation, and those are supported by KPIs, key performance indicators, that basically show you're adhering to the standard. And then processes are the individual processes you do to meet the standard. So, in our organization, I think standard, if I remember correctly, is 50 cold calls a week, 12 meetings a week, 15 existing customer touches a week, and that's per sales rep. Those are our standards. Now, how do we do it? We do it through our processes, right? We have a specific sales process, et cetera. And the same thing with our courses, right? Our courses have specific standards. They have video standards, like things need to be at a minimum 1080p, 60 frames per second. How do we actually implement a video in that? Well, we go and we have a specific video shooting process. We do these steps. How do we execute a class? We do these steps. And so you can take that and you can extrapolate that to your business, right? You can go and say, these are our standards for our sales team. These are our standards for our operations team. And that's one really cool place. And like I said, we'll discuss that in great depth on Friday. But that's one really cool place to reduce cost. But it also, when you get good at standards and processes, it is a way to actually increase revenue. And you may be like, okay, Phil, how do you increase revenue? Well, two ways. One, you increase revenue by reducing operational inefficiencies, thus doing more with the same amount of time, thus more revenue in the door, right? You're able to execute more revenue. The second way, though, is if you get really efficient with standards and processes, you go sell those and train your owner operators on them. If you have a service organization and you have a really good troubleshooting process, you can go and sell that troubleshooting process and train your owner operators on that. In our case, we have a really good training program. We can go to universities, although we really don't, because I haven't found the need, but we could, if I was looking for other revenue streams, could go to universities, package up our training programs, because they're all like in a package, and train people, train the trainer, and have them execute it out of a university or out of a trade school. We could do that if we wanted to, because our standards and our processes are really good. So that is another way to reduce costs and increase revenue. Now let's talk about the painful, usually not fun topic of staff optimization. So staff optimization is a positive thing and a negative thing. It's a positive thing if you have followed all of our previous podcasts where we've said log your job task codes, create standards and expectations and performance standards by role, go and analyze job task code performance against actual standards on those jobs and determine inefficiencies and train your team. Then optimization of staff can be really good, because that's how you increase your profitability. You say, okay, we really suck at VAV boxes. Why do we suck at VAV boxes? Well, we suck because our folks don't understand electrical, or they don't understand actuator mounting, or they don't understand airflow, whatever. Once you determine that, you create a training and mitigation plan, and you support that through processes. right? This is the literal step-by-step process with pictures or video on how to install a VAV box controller. And you can do that with sales. You can do that with finance. You can do that all day long, is implement those standards and processes. But also with a recession, you need to start considering, do you have that 40, 50-year person who all they can do is VAV boxes and they complain all the time? And maybe you need to let that person go. Maybe you have a brand new person who's new to the industry, who's not performing. It's not just about the experienced folks and their high salaries and them not having a ROI for that salary, because there are plenty of people who have high salaries and experiences that you'd be stupid to let go, and you really should go and keep them on board. It is less about, is this person 40 years or 1 year? Are they super expensive or super inexpensive? And it is more about, are you getting an ROI on that labor? Or is that labor costing you more? And a lot of folks in the larger OEMs are really good at this. They have people who just sit there and analyze this all day long. Okay. Now, on the smaller companies, they tend to struggle with this. One, because, it's like a family. You don't want to let go of your family or your team. You want to kind of make things work for people. But what it really comes down to is they don't have a way of determining, is this person providing? And I usually say you should do 3x to the business, whatever your salary is. So if you're a tech and you're getting paid 80 a year, you should be executing 240K worth of revenue profitably to go and be a fair trade. So if I have a tech and, I have $1 million worth of business, I should have 4 techs. That's kind of how I tend to look at it if those techs each are making like 60 to 80K. So with that in mind, you have to analyze, is this person going and returning, a 3x return? And if they're not, you have to ask yourself, why? Is this a standards and processes issue? If it is, you should not terminate the person. You should fix your standards and processes, because the person, right? Let's say you get rid of them and you bring someone new in, you're still going to have the exact same issues because you haven't fixed the underlying issue. And this is where I see a lot of small, medium-sized companies struggle. This is where we do a lot of our consulting, is around this topic. How do you determine if it's a standards and processes issue? How do you determine if it is a cost imbalance? What do you do to go and figure this out? And then once you know this, all right, what do you do from there? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing on Friday, is standards and processes and staff optimization. But I want to take a couple seconds now and see if anyone has some questions related to what we've covered so far on the podcast. I know we've covered quite a bit. We've went through a lot of different topics. I hope it's given you some things to consider. I don't ever want to tell you, thou shalt, this is the only way. Even though I know I have strong opinions, I want to give you information and then look to you with your own experience to go and say, hey, this applies to me. This doesn't apply to me. This works. This doesn't work. And then take that and hopefully build a better business, hopefully build a better career, hopefully have more fun, make more money, and do the things that you enjoy. So let's see if we have any questions on LinkedIn. I know that this schedule got kind of wonky, but let's take a look at that. Not seeing any there. Let's see if we have any questions here in YouTube. Nope. Okay. All right. So like always, we will be back at 12 p.m. Pacific for the Monday, Wednesday, Friday shows. We're back on track with everything now that all the vacation and travel's over. So I look forward to seeing you at those regular times. Sometimes the auto scheduler gets things mixed up with mountain time because we live in Arizona and it's all wonky. But it will always be 12 p.m. Pacific during, daylight savings time. I think we're in daylight savings time. Maybe. During the summer, spring, fall time, it'll be 12 p.m. Pacific, and there'll be 11 p.m. or 11 a.m. on, falls to spring, kind of winterish. As always, everything will be available. podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/349. Once again, that's podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/349. Let me know if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing you all on Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we're looking for guests. So if you feel that you could bring value to the curator community, let me know. We've got a lot of cool, exciting community-related announcements coming down the pipe. That should be coming very soon. So I look forward to being able to communicate all of that to you. Thanks so much for being here, and I look forward to talking to you all on Friday's episode. Thanks so much, and take care.